So back in the day, there used to be a show called Pimp My Ride. Some of you are probably familiar. And there was a particular guy on Pimp My Ride called Mad Mike.
All right, let's check it out. Nice work, Mike. You did it again, Mike.
Mad Mike would put LCDs in just about every part of the car possible. He was putting them in air vents, he was putting them in headrests, he was putting them in exhaust systems. It was crazy. And this build here originally was just gonna be a fast system. I was gonna get to the customer completely, wasn't even gonna film a video. And when I saw all these LCD fans, it came to me, how is this thing gonna perform with all these LCD fans versus just having regular fans? So the idea of this video is to throw this together, but before we throw it together, I wanna set up a test bench with a regular set of Lian Li fans, not these fancy Unifan TL wireless LCD 120s. So starting out with the specs and starting with the LCD based products, we have a Hydro Shift LCD cooler from Lian Li. We have a Y70 Touch from HYTE. We have 10 Lian Li LCD fans. Then on to the other products, we have 64 gigabytes of DDR5 G.Skill White 6000 CL39 RAM, 9950X 3D. We have an MSI X870E Carbon. We have an RTX 5080 MSI White Edition. We have 1 terabyte and 4 terabyte NVMe SSDs from Samsung. And finally, we have a Lian Li 1000 watt Edge power supply. So if any of you guys saw my last video, you would know that my system unfortunately went down. So I'm actually using my real test bench over here. So we're gonna have to use the old box method. Let's drop in the 9950X 3D into the MSI Carbon board. Then let's put in the G.Skill 64 gigabyte RAM kit.
Ram it in there.
I gotta say, I'm not usually a MSI fan, but they did a really good job at their White Edition card here, and just their card in general looks pretty decent. Now, real quick, I want to talk about this PSU because I consider myself fairly up to date on tech. And when I asked the guy, what are we gonna do about all the USB plugins for all those LCD fans? He was like, oh no, the power supply will handle that. And I was like, what are you talking about, power supply? This power supply actually has a bunch of USB plugins, like a little hub here that goes to the motherboard. That's pretty sick. Thank you for your purchase. Now, that is one cool looking power supply. I have been noticing too that a lot of these companies have been including power supplies that have nice cables like this. They're always a lot thinner. Like if you look at the thickness there, versus something like this cable mod cable, you can see that there's quite a difference, but it's still nice to see that they include something that at least looks a lot better than black or crappy mustard cables, you know? So the customer makes the decision here, and he wanted the 1 terabyte up top and the 4 terabyte down in the bottom lane, so I just went with that. And the other thing too is that this board has an awesome quick in and out for any NVMe SSDs. The nice thing about this build too is it has limited cables. Love that. So this is an extremely nice looking cooler. One thing I do find interesting though, is that they continue to use the Intel bracket. Yeah, I'm actually wrong about that. This is actually the AMD bracket, and the way it works is there's a little sophisticated mounting system, and you'll see that in just a second. So usually when you see a bracket, they come in metal. These are actually plastic, so I'm not really a fan of these AMD brackets, but we'll see how they hold up. So we're gonna be removing these guys. So the reason I thought it looked like Intel is they use that similar X pattern instead of a rectangle. And as you can see here, this bracket fits in that pattern to offset to fit the cooler. Time for the dreaded paste application. And in this form of applicationing the pasting, I'm actually just gonna do it the proper way. We're gonna add some more. I'm gonna make sure that this is done correctly here. So I did notice that this paste is a little bit dry, and I do get to clean up these little tiny edges where stuff falls off. That's what's annoying about this IHS, but I will make this as best as I can get it. Don't be a fool and leave this on like I always do. All right, so we're gonna mount this with the cooler tubes facing up. So if you guys are familiar with the channel, you'll know that I always test stuff in this corner over here. But since my PC's down and I need to test a good resolution setup, which is gonna be these screens here and not that 1080p screen, I gotta do this over here. So I'm not gonna lie, this machine took almost 3 minutes to post, so I was getting a little bit nervous considering some of these parts are way within the return window. This guy bought some of these parts about a year ago. So I got a little bit nervous, but we got into the BIOS. I'm enabling Precision Boost Overdrive. I'm using Expo 1 and a few minor tweaks in the BIOS to get the best performance you could get as an average user out of the system without overclocking or doing anything crazy. All right, guys, so we're gonna check this first and we'll compare this after. This is just the idle after letting this start up and sit for a minute. Again, all the startup apps are basically off. All the basic stuff is debloated as much as possible. We're using 5.5 gigs of RAM, and we're literally sitting at 1% utilization. Obviously, that'll change a little bit if I move around the mouse, do a couple of things, but so we're gonna be checking that after the software is installed and running with all the LCDs. Our test bench, all set up and ready to go. The way we're gonna do this, the control method, is pretty simple. We have Windows 11 installed. I debloated it as much as possible. We're gonna do everything out of the box. I get 3 different games to run. I wanna run Far Cry 6 because it's a little bit CPU heavy. I want to run Cyberpunk, it's pretty balanced, and then I'm gonna run COD, which, you know, a lot of people still play COD to this day. We are not gonna run OBS. We're not gonna run anything in the background at all. So this is pretty much a blank slate of Windows with Steam installed. And the reason I also picked those benchmarks to run is because they have internal benchmarks and I don't have to rely on, you know, using OBS and using something like MSI Afterburner to get the proper numbers. So I made a conscious decision here to give you guys a side-by-side comparison in a little bit, instead of showing you the benchmarks individually up front and then after and doing a comparison like that. We are using the exact same settings across the board, 1440p, high settings, and I will again re-explain that in just a minute, but let's jump to actually finishing the build itself. Now it's time to install the motherboard. It's going to be a little tricky due to all this stuff attached, but now I can't see that there's a standoff here, but I did check the back and we will pop this off to install that screw. We're not going to be using any drills today, just the old-fashioned manual Husky screwdriver. One thing to note too is that this has to come out. This is where the DVI port is. So you have to take this out to install that bottom screw. Unfortunately, they're just like right in front of each other. That felt rewarding. So before I start installing the other fans, I just want to say a couple things. We'll start doing the cable management first, but this is a little bit of an oversight, and I didn't think of this either. I didn't technically like pick all these parts out, but this is where we're putting these fans. So you're not going to be able to see those LCDs really through these vents. That being said, they'll still work. You're just not going to be able to see the LCDs. You can see these extra loose wires everywhere. There we go. This is going to be a you and me moment. I've never actually installed a 360 on the bottom of a Y70, so let's just see. Sorry, 360 set of fans, not a 360. Just want to see how easy those will go in. All right, looks like we can do it. So if you put the bottom ones in, and then you attach it while it's in here, I think we can get it to work. There we go. And I just got to make sure none of this stuff pops off. Like I'm already seeing this popping off, which is kind of annoying. So, and I gotta take all these stickers off. So badly wanted to peel the sticker off, but it says, please peel after application completed. So we have a bit of an issue. We actually ran out of USB headers, even though it looks like we have so many. The Y70 touch screen up here requires one of these headers. So between that fan, the bottom fans, the side fans, the top fans, and the LCD pump, we ran out of these. And there's only 2 on the motherboard, so I gotta figure out something to get all these to function correctly. Now finally for the fun part, installing the graphics card. Should just go in nice and easy. Oh, you know what, because it's vertical, we gotta pull these plugs out. Nice. So I don't normally script my videos, but this particular section I did write down because I wanted to emphasize and explain that this is quite an extreme situation. There's not going to be too many people that are running this many LCDs, so your performance might vary. I saw some pretty interesting results. I mean, we're only doing a small batch of 4 different benchmarks. The other thing to note too is one of the fans is actually off because I needed to get another USB extension. There were so many USB hookups for these wireless fans. It's actually quite ridiculous. And I'll get into that in the end of the video with a final discussion. But so basically what we're doing here is we're gonna have all of the games set on 1440p high settings with no DLSS. The reason I chose 1440p instead instead of 1080p is mostly because if you're going to be buying expensive fans like this, there's a good chance you're going to be buying expensive hardware to go with it, and 1080p is kind of going to be out of the, you're not going to be using it anymore with this kind of hardware. So with Call of Duty, I actually ended up running this benchmark 6 times instead of 4 times. I ran all the other ones 4 times and then got an average. The LCDs off, we had an average of 171 FPS with a 1% low of 137. With the LCDs on, we had an average of 169 FPS and a 1% low of 127 FPS. And this is going to be something you'll see kind of going forward here, where the 1% lows are more impacted than the actual average frame rate. Up next, we have Cyberpunk 2077, and this one we saw a lot less of an impact. The LCDs off, we saw an average frame rate of 182 FPS. With the LCDs off, 1% low, we're looking at 155. Turning the LCDs on, we're seeing 178 average FPS and a 1% low of 148. I ran this game 4 times back to back, and I was able to get similar results every time. Far Cry 6 is a little bit of an older game, but it has some CPU strain that's unlike other games, so I really wanted to test it, and to my surprise, this game was barely affected at all. With the LCDs off, we saw an average frame rate of 120 FPS and the 1% low of 115. Turning the LCDs on, we saw an average FPS of 118 with a 1% low of 113. This is actually pretty surprising. I picked this game specifically because it has kind of a strange CPU bottleneck sometimes. I hate using that word, but it's just limited by the CPU more than other games. That being said, it still ran really good. And for the last thing, I did a synthetic benchmark. This is called Steel Nomad. This is in the 3D Mark suite. And the LCDs off, we got an average FPS of 87. And with the LCDs on, we got an average FPS of 82. I'm sorry I didn't actually look at the 1% lows. I was actually focusing on the scores, and the scores were quite a bit different too. We had 8,629 with the LCD screens off, and a score of 8,272 with the LCD screens on. So there was a difference there synthetically. It's not massive, as you can see by the numbers, around 5 FPS. I did run this a couple of times. The average was always around 4 to 5 FPS difference. And here is the finished product montage. So a couple months back, my buddy Min gave me one of these fans. It's been sitting around for a little while, and I was like, what am I going to use it on? This is a 140 TL LCD. This is not the wireless per se, which I'm going to get into why I don't understand why they're calling it a wireless fan. That being said, the person who had me build this is going to see this, and I just want to shout you out. Thank you for letting me do this and put together your system. Came out awesome, and I was stoked to be able to like try out the benchmarks and all that stuff like that. Would I recommend these fans? Probably not, because there's a couple things. Like if you're building a really high-end system, I think it would be really cool to get like 3 of them that you can really see, and then maybe mix and match some of the other Lian Li fans that aren't quite as expensive that perform just as well. Like the fans that I was using in the setup to do the testing without the LCDs, those are excellent fans for performance. They have RGB versions of those fans as well. My biggest gripe is calling them wireless. The wireless aspect is just the dongle being plugged in. It still requires a ridiculous amount of USB inputs, the USB headers that go on the motherboard, which For whatever reason, years ago, they had like 3, 4 sometimes. They've been just eliminating them. Now we have like 2 at a time sometimes if you're lucky. So that power supply that the customer picked out was rock solid, really good. We just missed that one extra port that we needed. So that's all settled now. Everything's up and running good. And the customer is actually, the PC's still behind me here. He's going to be picking it up this weekend. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I gotta say about this. Let me know what you guys think. Was this overkill? Is that many LCDs overkill? Yeah. Thanks again for checking out the video. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in another one. Bye.